I'm going to read a little bit from the book, but before I do that, I want to say a little about this book is dedicated to a young man called Billy Kane. And Billy Kane was one of our youth club members when we were running the Salt Shaker Youth Club round the corner at 174 Antrim Road in the 1980s. And sadly, Billy died. And the story of what happened to Billy is in this book. And I'm delighted that Mrs. Kane, Billy's mother, is with us this evening. And I want to say thank you, Bridget, who was very kind when I spoke to her, asking her if I could dedicate the book to the memory of her son. And I'm also delighted that Billy's sisters and niece are also here this evening. So I just want to say a particular thank you to them for coming along this evening. And I just want to dedicate this book to Billy. And I thought I would read a wee bit to you. I'm going to read just the first, just a paragraph from the first chapter to introduce the book, and then I'm going to read a little section which might give you a flavour of what that's all about. In 1985, I went to live on the other side of the peace line. Everyone said my head was cut. It was the summer of Live Aid, and Bob Geldof pledged to save Africa from hunger. My ambitions were more modest. I wanted to stop fighting between Catholics and Protestants in Belfast. So I'm going to give you a wee flavour of how we tried to do that. So this is from a chapter called Blessed Are the Peacemakers. For months, Leslie and I had been discussing how we might bring the young people from our two youth clubs together so that they could become friends and understand each other better. We knew we would have to be careful that everyone was safe and that the event didn't turn into a riot. I knew from the cross-community football that bringing enemies together to compete was not a good idea. A few of the young people had visited each other's clubs or bumped into each other at our house, but we needed a good number to agree to meet together for a meaningful encounter. Leslie and I agreed that if the young people had never met one of the other sort before, it was essential that they had a positive first experience. We had heard stories about a charity that organised holidays where a Protestant and a Catholic were twinned and stayed with a family in the USA. If the two teenagers bonded, it was a great success, and they even kept in touch when they got home to Northern Ireland. But if they didn't get along, they came home hating the other side even more, because they didn't like the only one of the other side they'd ever have to live with. We needed to find somewhere neutral and accessible territory where all the young people could feel safe. We realised that the Columbanus community up the Antrim Road would be perfect. We checked out this location with both sets of interested young people, and all of them were happy with this neutral place because they said it was full of holy Joes from both sides. Most of the young people in both youth clubs declined the invitation to meet the other side, but as the paramilitaries on both sides didn't forbid the venture completely, we ended up with a group of about 6 teenagers from each youth club. The stage was set for real peacemaking. Not just Leslie and me trying to convince one side that the other side wasn't so bad. This was giving the young people an opportunity to find this out for themselves. We read some books from Caramila about helping groups to talk to each other. Then we planned what we would do. We agreed to play some team-building games to help the young people to get to know each other, to facilitate a short discussion about what they wanted to know about each other, and if there were no casualties by this stage, to finish off with tea and biscuits. The young people from my club were aged between 16 and 18, while Leslie's were between 13 and 15. They'd grown up a couple of miles apart, but they might as well have lived on different planets. They lived in separate streets, went to different schools, and played different sports. One of the most striking experiences of living on the other side was that it showed me how ignorant the two sides were about each other. So many myths and stereotypes had been passed down the generations in the two parallel universes on either side of the peace wall that it was hard to know where to begin to replace prejudice with reality. When everyone arrived, Leslie and I welcomed the other club especially warmly to show that they were humans. The two groups sat down at opposite ends of the room. My lads were quite boisterous and were slagging each other as usual, but Leslie's groups was more awkward. The team building games helped to break the ice, and some of Leslie's kids started to laugh at the banter from my crew, especially when everyone introduced themselves. Nonetheless, the two sides remained at their own end of the room. Next came the discussion where they were going to respect and forgive each other and realise they were all the same and want to meet every week to work for peace. Leslie and I took a big flip chart page and wrote at the top, "What do you want to know about Catholics? What do you want to know about Protestants?" After an initial silence, the two groups started to shout out a few questions, and some of the young people wrote down their own. Of course, the questions included, "Who wants to lumber Big Leslie?" And "Why is Tony such a specky bastard?" But the young people asked some good questions which they'd never had an opportunity to ask directly before. They had learned all about what the other side believed from their own side, so there were a few surprises, especially when the members of one group did not have a unified view in response to each question. This immediately killed off the prejudice that them are all the same, so they are. Leslie's group asked my group why they couldn't accept that they were British. "We're not British, we're Irish." "No, you're not. You're British." "No, we're Irish, so we are." "You're British, this is the UK." "Irish, Chucky Arla." "British, Irish, British, Irish, British, Irish." My group asked Leslie's group, "Why don't you believe in Mary?" Few of the young Protestants went to church and they didn't know the answer. My group asked Leslie's group, "Why don't you want a united Ireland?" "Because we're British and not Irish." "No, you're not, you're Irish." "No, we're British, so we are." "You're Irish, this is Ireland." "British, Irish, British, no surrender." "Irish, British, Irish, British." The British-Irish debate was getting us nowhere. It reminded me of the Monty Python sketch in which the opposing characters continuously slap each other across the face with a wet fish. Although this conversation was clearly less funny. Leslie's group asked my group why they wanted the Brits out. At this point, one of my lads gave the young loyalists an Irish history lesson covering 500 years of British oppression, which left them speechless. "Why do you march through our areas? Why is that your culture?" asked my group. Leslie's group clammed up completely. This seemed the appropriate moment to draw attention to the fact that both groups had posed the question, "Would you have sex with someone from the other side?" This provoked laughter, a few dirty jokes that seemed inappropriate on the premises of the Columbanus community, and a definite sense that the answer to the question was yes. "Hands up anyone who's lost a family member or a friend in the Troubles," said Leslie. Every one of the young people put their hand up. This felt like a turning point, and the mood improved a little. After the discussion, most of the young people shook hands and said they wanted to meet again before giving each other a light, having a smoke together, and returning home in their separate minibuses. My minibus was jubilant, concluding that Protestants were ignorant and didn't know their own history, and they were afraid to argue their point because they knew they were wrong. Leslie's minibus was angry because they couldn't compete with the knowledge of the other group. "Leslie, we felt wick, so we did. They know everything about their history and politics, and we know fuck all." Leslie and I agreed that the cross-community session would have worked better if her group had done some preparatory work beforehand. If they had explored and understood their own history and culture a little better, then they would have been able to engage more confidently with the others. This later became known as single identity work. Later still, single identity work also became a convenient way of securing funding with no intention of ever meeting the other side. On the way home in Leslie's minibus, there had also been a much freer discussion among her young people over the hypothetical question of whether they would be prepared to shag a taig. Apparently, the conclusion of this conversation was that love, or at least sex, could conquer all. Thank you very much.